The world of geopolitics thrives on moments that feel larger than life, the kind of encounters that symbolize a turning point in history. On August 18th, 2025, one such moment unfolded when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with former U.S. President Donald Trump. Why was this meeting so significant? Because it wasn't just a handshake between two politicians. It was a collision of personalities, legacies, and competing visions of how the West should handle the ongoing war in Ukraine and its broader confrontation with Russia. Why this meeting matters. To understand the weight of this event, you need to rewind and look at the context. For Zelensky, this meeting was about survival. His nation had endured years of relentless Russian aggression. Every diplomatic channel, every potential ally, every opportunity to secure resources or promises of support mattered. For Trump, the stakes were different. Known for his unorthodox approach to foreign policy and his skepticism of international commitments, his voice carried enormous weight, not just in U.S. politics, but across the globe. Whether or not he held official office, his opinions could shape debates in Washington and ripple outward to NATO capitals. Put simply, this wasn't just diplomacy. It was theater, and everyone was watching. The symbolism. The images alone spoke volumes. Zelensky, the wartime leader in military-style dress, sitting across from Trump, a figure who had long questioned U.S. involvement in foreign wars. The contrast was stark, almost cinematic. For Ukraine, the symbolism was one of persistence, showing that even skeptical voices in America couldn't be ignored. For Trump, it was a chance to project influence, a reminder that he still had the ability to shape the global conversation. The backdrop of the war. By mid-2025, the war in Ukraine had settled into a grinding, attritional phase. The initial shock of invasion had long passed, but Russia's capacity to sustain pressure remained. Ukraine, meanwhile, was exhausted but unbroken, dependent on Western support not just for weapons, but for energy, reconstruction, and morale. Against this backdrop, Trump's skepticism of blank check aid for Kyiv loomed large. Many in Washington debated whether continued massive support was sustainable. Zelensky knew he had to make his case, directly and forcefully. What each side wanted Zelensky's goal. He came into the meeting determined to secure some form of commitment, whether public endorsement of continued U.S. support, or at least assurances that a potential future Trump-led policy wouldn't abandon Ukraine. His message was clear. Ukraine's fight isn't just Ukraine's. It's the front line of democracy against authoritarian expansion. Trump's position. For Trump, the meeting was a chance to reinforce his narrative of America first. He wanted to appear pragmatic, willing to hear Zelensky out, but also firm in questioning why American taxpayers should carry the heaviest burden of Europe's defense. At the same time, Trump could use the moment to position himself as a deal-maker, someone capable of exploring alternatives to endless conflict. The global audience. While the meeting was nominally bilateral, the true audience was global. NATO allies. They watched anxiously, knowing that America's long-term commitment to Ukraine hinged in part on Trump's influence over the U.S. political debate. Russia. Moscow undoubtedly paid close attention, hoping for signs that cracks in Western unity were deepening. China, the Middle East, and beyond. For many global powers, the outcome of the Zelensky-Trump encounter would signal whether Western resolve remained steady or was beginning to fracture. The first exchange reports from those present suggest the opening of the meeting was cordial but heavy with subtext. Zelensky expressed gratitude for America's past support, but emphasized that Ukraine's fight was ongoing and still existential. Trump, for his part, praised the resilience of the Ukrainian people, but immediately pivoted to questions about costs, corruption, and the limits of U.S. responsibility. It was a tone that captured the essence of the encounter, respectful yet full of tension. Why it resonates. This was more than a political meeting. It was a symbolic clash of worldviews. Zelensky representing the plea of a nation fighting for survival. Trump representing the growing skepticism within the United States about the costs of foreign entanglements. The August 18th meeting didn't resolve those tensions. If anything, it highlighted them more vividly. But it also underscored the fact that Ukraine's future, and by extension, Europe's security, remains tied not just to military battles, but to political conversations in Washington and beyond. The meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump on August 18, 2025, ended without a dramatic breakthrough, but the ripples it sent across the globe were immediate and intense. What was said? Behind closed doors. While the cameras only captured the opening gestures, insiders offered clues about the private exchanges. Zelensky reportedly presented a stark picture of Ukraine's situation: dwindling munitions, battered infrastructure, and a population still reeling from years of war. His appeal was straightforward. Ukraine cannot endure without sustained Western support. Trump, according to leaks, pushed hard on accountability. He pressed Zelensky on how American aid was being spent and questioned whether European allies were doing enough. At one point, Trump floated the idea of a negotiated settlement with Moscow, a point of sharp disagreement, given Zelensky's insistence that Ukraine would not cede occupied territory. The conversation underscored the fundamental divide. Zelensky seeking assurance of unwavering support, Trump positioning himself as a skeptic of endless commitments. Media reactions. Within hours, the world's media was ablaze with analysis. In Ukraine, the meeting was portrayed as a bold move by Zelensky to engage even the toughest voices in Washington. Local headlines emphasized his persistence. Even Trump, a critic of aid, could not ignore Ukraine's plight. In the United States, coverage split along partisan lines. Supporters of continued aid argued that Zelensky had made a compelling case for Ukraine's survival as a global priority. Critics countered that Trump was right to question why America should bear the bulk of the cost. In Europe, newspapers reflected anxiety. NATO capitals feared that U.S. unity on Ukraine policy could fracture further, especially if Trump's influence continued to grow. In Russia, state media crowed that Trump's skepticism validated Moscow's claims that the West was tiring of the war. Kremlin commentators framed the meeting as proof that cracks in the alliance were spreading. The political impact in the U.S. Perhaps the most important audience was the American voter. Trump's remarks echoed growing public fatigue with foreign entanglements. Polls have shown a shift. While Americans initially rallied around Ukraine, questions about costs and priorities are becoming louder. Zelensky's gamble was clear. By engaging Trump, he hoped to soften that skepticism, or at least prevent it from becoming outright opposition. Whether he succeeded remains unclear. Some voters saw his persistence as admirable. Others saw it as another sign of Ukraine's dependence. NATO's response. NATO officials issued statements reinforcing unity, but Behind the scenes, diplomats scrambled to reassure one another. The fear wasn't just about Trump's personal influence, it was about what his posture revealed. A significant faction in U.S. politics is no longer willing to write blank checks for Ukraine. European leaders began quietly discussing contingency plans, more defense spending, accelerated weapons production, and deeper regional cooperation in case American support falters. The strategic meaning. So, what does this meeting really tell us? Ukraine's diplomacy is exhaustive but necessary. Zelensky knows every meeting, every photo op, and every conversation with Western leaders matters. Ukraine's battlefield resilience is tied directly to the willingness of allies to keep sending supplies. Trump's shadow is global. Whether in office or not, Trump's voice shapes debate. By meeting him, Zelensky acknowledged a hard truth. America's internal divisions are as consequential to Ukraine's survival as any Russian offensive. Russia gains psychological leverage. Even without a change in U.S. policy, the appearance of division boosts Kremlin morale. If Moscow believes Western unity is weakening, it may be emboldened to prolong the conflict. The bigger picture. The Zelensky-Trump encounter was not about immediate deals or signed agreements. It was about optics, influence, and narrative. It revealed three things at once: Ukraine's desperation for long-term guarantees, Trump's continued ability to dominate global conversations, the fragility of Western unity in the face of war fatigue. Looking back, August 18, 2025, may not be remembered as the day the war turned, but it will be remembered as a moment when the world glimpsed just how precarious the balance truly is. Closing thoughts. The image of Zelensky and Trump sitting across from one another will remain a defining snapshot of this conflict's diplomatic dimension. A wartime president appealing for solidarity, a political heavyweight questioning the costs of solidarity. The stakes couldn't be higher. For Ukraine, the question is survival. For the West, the question is whether unity can hold. And for Russia, it's the hope that every such meeting brings the world one step closer to division. What happens next will depend not just on what leaders decide in conference rooms, but on how nations and their citizens define what's worth fighting for.